Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for Bloomreach's Commerce Pulse Quarterly Roundtable. My name is Michelle DeMeo, and I'll be hosting our event today. I'll be joined by my colleague, Ian Burgers, as well as our two panelists, Pamela Danziger, market researcher, founder of research firm Unity Marketing, principal and consulting firm American Marketing Group, and senior Forbes.com contributor in the retail space. We'll also be joined by Brian Walker, Chief Strategy Officer here at Bloomreach. Brian, Pam, thank you both for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you.
For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, Commerce Pulse is a quarterly event that highlights the data we've gathered here at Bloomreach. Our digital experience platform powers commerce experiences for hundreds of brands and retailers around the world, helping businesses to drive more personalized, impactful digital experiences for their customers. As a result, our data paints a very comprehensive picture of the current state of commerce, in addition to giving us insight into the trends that will impact commerce in the near future. Each month, we gather data from our customers to uncover these patterns and trends in e-commerce, which are then detailed in our monthly Commerce Pulse blog posts. You can find all of those on our website, bloomreach.com. Today, we'll talk about what we've seen in this data over the past quarter, July through September, and what these trends indicate about the short and long-term shifts in consumer behavior. We'll break that down into three sections. First, a general overview, then a deep dive into retail and apparel, followed by a forward-looking discussion of holiday trends. So with that, we will get today's discussion started. I am going to pass it over to Ian, who will share some of the key data points about the overall trends we've seen this quarter. Ian?
Thanks, Michelle. So to get started, let's take a look at the overall year-over-year trend data for August. And here we can see that e-commerce is still going strong. Sales are up 25.20% in North America, and they're also up 6.82% in the UK and the EU. Now, traffic in North America is down 2.86%. But it's up 6% in the UK and in the EU. Conversion rates are down in both regions. They're down 0.87% in North America and 11.32% in the UK and in the EU. Now, we'll get to this in a few minutes, but average order size balances out some of these lower numbers that we're seeing in traffic rate and conversions. When we look at the year-to-date numbers, sales are even higher in North America, 35.08%. And in the UK and the EU, they're pretty stable at 6.82%. Traffic is up in both regions, 16.64% year-to-date in North America and 19.89% in the EU and the UK. Conversion rates are down 11% in the in the US and 1% in the UK and in the EU. Now, if we zoom in a bit, these are some other very interesting data points. The overall B2C sales are very impressive, actually. They are up 46.09% year to date. And I already briefly mentioned this before, but the overall online average order size is up 23.96%, really balancing out some of those lower conversion rates and traffic numbers we previously saw. So with that overall data, I'll pass it back to you, Michelle. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian. A lot of great insights here. Brian, let's start with you. As we consider this data that Ian just shared, what should we be taking away from this? And then also from a business point of view as well, what should we be taking away in terms of how we look at strategy based on these trends?
I apologize. I should know better than to leave myself on mute. Yeah, I think, first and foremost, we have to acknowledge that these numbers, for example, the overall B2C numbers plus 46% year to date, that's annualizing the tremendous growth we already saw last year due to the pandemic. And of course, we're by no means through the pandemic, and as we all probably recognize, that with the various variants, such as the Delta variant, we've kind of had to reopen the sort of quote unquote offline economy, and then in some markets start to close that back down, or there certainly continues to be a lot of sensitivity and concern with people needing to mask up, stay at home, and certainly depending on your demographic or other considerations, you may not feel as comfortable as we hoped getting about sort of a normal pre-pandemic kind of pattern. In addition to that, the convenience of online just continues to be reinforced. I mean, anecdotally, even see that in my own family, right? Where now we've got a subscription for our pet food. We've got, that just shows up every 2 weeks. We've sort of made, all of us, these transitions and how we think about fulfilling even routine tasks, such as grocery, that now relies on digital commerce and just the convenience factor that comes with that. In addition to the fact that we continue to see the work from home trend, really impacting city centers and impacting malls, such that the normal pre-pandemic, so to speak, traffic patterns with people commuting and running out at lunch or running by the store after work, that's no longer really the pattern today. And we can sort of anticipate that while people still enjoy getting out and about, and certainly there's shoppertainment, still a thing, and many consumers enjoy the serendipity and the experience, that just doesn't happen very often, right? And certainly for all of the routine things we need, or sort of task-oriented shopping that we might need, which might even include categories like apparel, or certainly categories like back to school, we're relying on the convenience of online. And so that's really reflected in these kind of growth numbers. I'll also say that the difference between North America and the UK and Europe is certainly being impacted by the macroeconomic environment in each market, as well as consumer confidence, which is frankly much higher in the US and in North America than it is in the UK and the EU. And I think the other last point I would make is there's no question that supply chain issues and inventory remain a big problem. And so, retailers still struggle to keep in stock some of their high demand items, or to keep their, virtual shelves and certainly their physical shelves inside their stores replenished. And certainly pre-pandemic, all the supply chains had transitioned primarily to offshore or nearshore. And with all the various supply chain and inventory management challenges that companies are facing, that's impacting their assortments. And you can see that, I think, reflected in depressed conversion rates. Shoppers may not be finding specifically what they're looking for, even with traffic remaining essentially steady in North America. That was a fairly slight drop we saw in August, and certainly traffic was even higher than last year in the UK and in Europe. And then lastly, the average order size piece, I think, is really a reflection of less product on sale, as well as a changing product mix. A 24% increase in average order size, that's massive, right? That's a pretty significant jump. And I think there's a lot of discussion in the marketplace about inflation. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that there may also be some inflationary effects reflected in the increase in average order size as well. So those are some thoughts, certainly based on those numbers.
Yeah, thank you for that. Pam, we're talking about a lot of broader trends here, but I'm curious, are you seeing similar trends in some of the more specific categories that you cover in your work?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, I just kind of hearing Brian talk, I thought, well, we can close up now because he's covered all the issues. I mean, it's been an amazing, we're now going on 2 years. It's been an amazing 2-year abrupt shift to, people before online was something, it was a discretionary thing you did, and some people were more comfortable doing it than others. But today, it's like we've all had to transition. We've all had to learn how to do it. And guess what? We discovered we loved it because, time is our ultimate luxury. And all of us only have 24/7. Some of us have a lot more money than others, but time is our luxury. And the convenience of online shopping, the convenience of subscriptions, as Brian talks about, you don't even have to think about it anymore. It's coming. I've got a subscription to coffee pods for my Keurig brewer, but no dogs. But the fact is, that's what people are looking for, and I mean, it's only going to continue to grow and grow and grow.
Yeah, certainly. Brian, anything else to add there before we move on to our next section?
No, I think we should move on. I mean, there may be some interesting points we want to cover as we move on.
Without a doubt. I want to turn our focus over now to retail and apparel. Ian, can you share some of that data, please?
Yes, definitely. Let's get into some of the retail numbers because I think it's showing some really interesting shifts in consumer buying behavior. So to start, here are some of the overall numbers for apparel. Sales were up 16.67% year over year in August, and they were also up 4% year to date. Traffic for apparel was up 16.23% year over year and 26.7% year to date. Conversion rates were actually down year over year, 17.03% in August, but were up 19.58% year to date. And again, we're seeing an increase in average order size here. It was up 6.35% year over year in August and 2.17% year to date. So with those overall numbers in mind, let's zoom in on some of the back to school shopping trends. As people are going back to school, it seems like they are definitely using e-commerce as a medium to shop. We see a pretty significant increase in backpack sales. Here we can see a 48.14% year over year sales increase in August. Searches for kids' masks actually show quite an interesting difference in the regions. Here we can see that searches were up quite a significant 66.92% for North America in August. But in the EU and the UK, it was down 89.85%. Now, lastly, school and classroom supply sales were up quite a large 53.78% year over year in August. Now, when we look at some of the back to work numbers, we are seeing some other trends than we just saw for back to school. Here we can see the months June, July, and August, and we're comparing the searches of office apparel like blazers, slacks, dress shirts, and dress pants, as well as the sales for these items. Here we can see that in June, searches were down 21%, as well as sales was down 31%. Then in July, we can see a bit of a growth trend happening. Searches were up 6% and sales were up 21%. And in August, we can see that search trend is still going up. We can see a month over month increase of 22%. But we can see that the sales trend has slowed down a bit. Here, sales grew 4% month over month. And lastly, I think the luxury segment has shown some very interesting trend data. This has historically been a segment that has really struggled during the pandemic, but we can see that sales numbers are up quite a significant 50.41% year over year in August, as well as 20.09% year to date. And traffic was also up 47.58% year over year and 30.68% year to date. And this last data point is quite interesting. We saw that the luxury brand Tory Burch was a top search term in the top 10 search terms overall in the month of August. So we can see that, you know, people are searching for luxury items and they're again spending their money online for luxury goods.
That's some great stuff. Thank you, Ian. I think we should start with luxury because there's a lot to dive into with that. And Pam, I would love to get your thoughts on this topic. How should we be thinking about some of these increases that we saw in luxury? And then also, if you maybe want to get into specifically looking at these luxury brands, how have you seen these brands looking at or adjusting their digital strategies, you know, when we consider this e-commerce growth?
Right. Well, I mean, it's really, it's very, very interesting because an awful lot of luxury brands had to be dragged, you know, kicking and screaming into the online e-commerce marketplace because they were absolutely convinced that luxury consumers wanted to go into stores and be wined and dined and concierged and you know, and handheld throughout the entire process. And that was an important part of the whole luxury experience. And while people really like to do that, you know, travel was gone, and travel is an important part of the luxury business. So, I mean, they had to adapt, and they've done a superb job in, you know, catching up and even getting ahead. I mean, I think McKinsey is saying that about 25 to nearly 30% of sales in the not too far distant future is going to be coming online in the luxury market. So, and again, it's to that point, time is the ultimate luxury. When luxury consumers can save time and go and get whatever they crave online, they're going to do it. So I think it's really fascinating. But, you know, Ian, you took me by surprise with the Tory Burch data, and I'm going to have to search and find out what in the world is making Tory Burch the most searched on luxury brand now, because that really surprised me. And you know, another factor, and I think this always has to be included in, you know, whenever we talk about the luxury market, is who buys luxury? Who are the true luxury consumers? They're people who are affluent, people who have money. And throughout this pandemic, the affluent, the upper tiers of, you know, in the income level, you know, really did very well coming out of it. It was the lower and middle class consumers that suffered a lot. And you know, their wealth is growing. They have a lot more money to spend, and they haven't spent it on travel, so they're indulging in luxury goods. But I think we're going to see that as travel opens up again, it'll kind of come back to, well, goods won't be growing at that fast. Experiences will you know, grow faster.
I think that makes sense. I think it's also, I think, important to recognize that the luxury segment took a very significant hit early in the pandemic, probably driven by, you know, the stop essentially in travel, the work from home trend, et cetera, impacted travel more so than any other segment. So what we're looking at there is the year over year growth, which means we're annualizing, you know, August of last year. So we just need to recognize that, you know, and I don't have the number off the top of my head, the degree to which luxury dropped last year. I don't know that it was as significant as the growth we're now seeing. So I don't know that we're just comping the pre-pandemic numbers, but it's important to recognize that the category really went through a tough period of time in the early phases of the pandemic. And of course, August of last year, I wouldn't really classify as early phase. It was really middle. But now we see that, as Pam said, right, the affluent are starting to spend on goods. They're using online to do it, just like with every other category. And certainly luxury goods, retailers and brands are really, of course, embracing digital commerce more so than ever before. And those consumers have also made a significant transition. I think that's reflected in those numbers.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Great points, both of you. Brian, now let's maybe shift a bit to back to school. Some strong numbers there. How should we be interpreting those trends? And maybe what are some of the long-term implications of those numbers?
Yeah, well, I certainly remember, even with my own kids, a number of years ago, kind of that back to school shopping spree, shopping for clothing, shopping for shoes, shopping for school supplies, the backpacks, all of it. And that was typically an offline activity, honestly. Maybe you would order components of what you were putting together for your kids online, but it was sort of that, traditional pack up the car, let's go, we're gonna get this done. And it was a bit of a marathon, if I'm honest. And it was, I think every parent out there probably, both dreaded it. But then, there was sort of this anticipation and optimism around a new school year at the same time mixed in with that. Now, of course, we're leveraging the online channels. And so you can see that, the overall impact of that in a number of the different categories, but also in the data that Ian shared there. And certainly, we also need to recognize that, last year in North America, most kids were being schooled remotely. And so they didn't need necessarily the same kind of clothing, or backpacks or even school supplies in the same traditional sense. And so we saw a bit of a dip in a number of those categories last year. This year, all the wardrobe needed to be replaced. And certainly in North America, you not only did the kids grow, but also you wanted to get them out of their casual stuff that probably was getting a little tattered and get them well prepared, school supplies, etc. It's clearly the face mask data is really, really interesting. I think reflecting on that, certainly it's a bit political here in the United States, with different states and regions, utilizing different regulations and mandates and so forth. But across the US in general, or North America in general, kids going back to school, parents, because of the lack of a vaccine available for young people, really want their kids to mask up, certainly as they're heading to school, and to the degree they can enforce it in school. And you see that reflected in that kids' face mask data. We need to recognize that we're in a little different cycle in the UK and in Europe, and kids in the UK, for example, were heading back to school, I think this time last year already. And they're really trying to push for that in that market specifically. I can't speak to the whole of the EU, but I think that's partly the demand difference so significant we see in a very specific product category like that. And I think it really reflects sort of different approaches to getting kids back to school, different sensitivities, and really just the timing that we're looking at there. But certainly in North America, this has been the school year. And certainly in where I live in the Northwest, kids aren't even back to school yet. That's not true. They've just gone back to school, I should say. I should correct myself. Whereas in other markets, that happened, late July or even in early August. So, we see that reflected, I think, in this data.
And I'd like to add that you can't underestimate the consumer exuberance that the children are finally going back to school. And I think that's reflected in these increased numbers too. I mean, they're excited. I have twin grandsons, and they were so proud to show me their new backpacks. And their mommy and papa spent a lot, for the twins. You have to have two. They spent a lot of money, but the children were so excited, and and the parents, boy, they are excited too, to get them out of the house and back to school.
Indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe now as we shift to back to work trends, I don't know that the same excitement is there. Maybe that depends on the person.
No.
But I'm curious to get both of your thoughts in this area before we move on. And we could start with you maybe. How are you thinking about work apparel? This has changed quite a bit. Curious to hear your thoughts on trends, categories that you think are going to benefit as we move forward?
Well, I don't know about, everybody else, but I've got a whole lot of clothes in my closet that don't fit me, business apparel that don't fit me anymore. I hate to admit it. And I think that, I think that's going to be a real counter trend, a surprising thing that we're going to see as the months evolve, is that people will be shopping for more business attire. And I think it's the same thing, the same psychology that applies to the children. It's like after we've been isolated and after we've had to stay home and we adapted and we got used to it, now when we go out, we maybe want to up our game. We want to dress up a little bit and sort of celebrate that freedom. So I see, even though now it seems like the data on business attire is down, I think we're going to see that recover very quickly as people, really, again, start to celebrate the release from the lockdown.
I'm going to put a little counterpoint there. And I am by no means should be commenting on fashion trends, but I will say that, anecdotally, I have noticed just even more casual approaches to apparel in work environments than before the pandemic, which was already in e-commerce, for example, or technology. Many of the types of environments that I was meeting, other colleagues from other businesses, right? It's already, was relatively casual. I think in a sense it's already progressed even further, and even in sectors that, sort of retained a formality to how you presented yourself and dressed. You think about financial services or, city centers like San Francisco or New York. You can even see it there, right? And it's sort of like people felt a little bit unshackled from the constraints of the dress shirt or the necktie or even the blazer, or certainly with women with dress shoes and so forth. And maybe there's sort of a relief that maybe we can just be a lot more comfortable. But of course, there's a difference between comfort and like extreme casual. But nonetheless, I agree with Pam that it seems logical that we would want to kind of take an opportunity to spiffy up and maybe refresh the wardrobe. But if you look specifically at the search terms, Ian, that you included in that data, it was sort of like our conception of business attire pre-pandemic, whereas now I think we need to reflect the fact that maybe it's a little different. And we also just need to recognize that even as businesses are starting to encourage their employees back to office, or in some cases mandating it, talking to friends and colleagues from around the world, they're still in work shift scenarios where half the team is in 2 days a week and half the team is in the other 2 days a week, and they're at 50% capacity even with the return to work. And then there's still many businesses that have essentially said, we're not reopening the office until at the earliest 2022. Or you have situations, as we read about, where employees are increasingly saying, I'm really not that interested, because they like the flexibility and the efficiency of remote work and collaborating over the web. So I think we're kind of still in this very interesting transition when it comes to back to work across North America as well as Europe. And I think it's reflected in categories like work apparel, where we still really haven't seen that. I do expect that in the fashion, both high fashion as well as everyday apparel trends and so forth, we are likely to see kind of a return to crisp fashion, dressing up, if you will. But I don't think we're seeing that yet.
And, well, one of the things, you talk about the difference between comfort versus business attire, and what has happened over the last couple of years is a change in fabrication.
That's
so
true.
we can look very crisp on the outside and be very comfortable.
That is a very fair point. One we've all benefited from. Well, I guess we'll see how that one plays out over the next few months. But as we consider some of these future trends, one area that I know is going to be top of mind for everyone, and I want to make sure that we cover, is holiday trends. The holiday season is around the corner, crazy as that may seem. Obviously, we do not have any data from this year quite yet to be sharing on that, but for comparison's sake, we're going to walk everyone through the 2020 holiday season. So Ian, can you walk us through those numbers?
Definitely. Let's take a look at some of the numbers from last year's holiday season. Most of you know, last year we saw some very impressive numbers for e-commerce during the holiday season. Just for some context, all these numbers are from October 1st through Cyber Monday 2020. And, you know, we saw a very impressive 40% year-over-year sales growth there in North America, compared to a 23% year-over-year growth in 2019. Now, when we look at some of the Cyber Monday sales, those were up 16% year-over-year. Overall, apparel was also up quite significantly, 35% year-over-year in the holiday season of 2020. And Black Friday sales were up 22% year-over-year in 2020. So with those quite impressive numbers in mind, I'm really wondering what our panelists have to say about the holiday season this year.
Yes, a very mysterious question mark. We are coming off of obviously a very strong 2020 holiday season. So now that we're looking towards 2021, maybe Pam, we can start with your thoughts. What are you expecting for the season ahead?
Well, I mean, I'm already seeing in my inbox all the surveys, and the numbers are all over the place. And you know, I feel it's just too early to really try to put a number on it. And last year, the NRF, which is the National Retail Federation, they kind of like are the big guru when it comes to predictions. They came out very late with their predictions last year. At the time, I thought we'd never hit those numbers, and we exceeded them. So, you know, I really don't know. I mean, I think we've got one of the factors I think that's going to be important this year is we're going to be pulling spending and purchases forward away from November, December timeframe. Now, the NRF always predicts November, December retail. I think we're going to see a lot more spending as October rolls around. So that may change, you know, the overall perspective. I think the supply chain that Brian was talking about is still a big question mark. From what I understand, the factories in Vietnam, I don't know whether they've opened yet or not, but they were closed down. There's still the big, huge cargo ships that are sitting in you know, waiting to get into port to unload. So that's a big question mark. If we just don't have the products on the shelves, people will be getting gift cards. I would assume that will be the choice. Those gift cards don't get booked into retailers on numbers until after they're spent. So, you know, while the spending, you know, some of the spending will be pulled forward, some of it's going to be pushed out into 2022. But I think as long as it's beginning to feel like the Delta variant is we're kind of getting control over that. It seems like I'm not sure about inflation, but it seems like it's kind of, maybe it's peaked, or it's going to kind of, it's not as out of control as it seemed to be getting in June, July. So I think that exuberance, you know, hopefully is going to keep, you know, if that's going to keep people spending and they're going to feel confident. As long as that happens, I think we'll see a very good year, but the numbers may be a little bit out of whack simply because a lot of the spending will go into October and a lot of it might go into 2022.
Yeah, I think those are really, really excellent points. I think the, you know, if you think about the supply chain, essentially everything that's going to be sold for holiday is either already landed or it's on the water at this point in time. I can say I was sailing in Puget Sound outside of Seattle. There are an incredible number of container ships backed up. Never seen anything like that. And I was gone for a week and they were still in the same spot when I came back. We've never seen anything like that. The Port of Long Beach, even more so in Southern California. So it's logistics that are incredibly impacted. Also, factories in Asia have been impacted. You mentioned Vietnam with factories being closed due to coronavirus concerns, and in China, for example, a shortage of labor that factories have been dealing with, meaning that they cannot supply the purchase orders that they had on the books in time. So you've got a combination of factors, shipping and logistics plus production that have impacted it. And now we're really at a point now where if you don't already have that inventory, you don't have anything to sell. So I agree that that's a variable that's going to be very hard to factor in to what we're going to see in holiday. I'd say from a consumer perspective, all the same things we've been talking about here on the call are going to be a key factor. Pandemic situation aside, whether or not we feel like Delta variant, for example, is becoming less of an issue and fewer people are getting sick and hospitalized and communities are able to open up or not, consumers are going to leverage the web. So, we're kind of past the point, in my opinion, of really treating this as a pandemic impact. Now it's just consumer behavior moving forward. And as Pam said, retailers and brands are going to push promotions earlier, partly to spread out the impact into their own fulfillment organizations, where again, they're struggling with labor, to staff their warehouses. Recently, large retailers have been talking about the number of associates they're hiring for holiday. I apologize, I don't have the specific number on the top of my head, but I know, for example, Walmart is adding, I think north of 200,000 associates, which is a big number unless you compare it to Walmart's workforce, but it's still a very significant number of people. In the past, almost all those associates would have been added to stores. This year, almost all those associates are being added to warehouses to fulfill the online demand. So that's a signal to us what a retailer of Walmart's significance expects in their own business, let alone everyone else. And so we've got a combination of factors there that retailers are looking to spread out demand. So that's going to push, a lot of the promotional activity even earlier. So those of us like myself who don't like the Christmas lights up or the Christmas music or the festivities to be up before the day after Thanksgiving, I'm kind of a traditionalist in that way. Well, I'm going to have to get used to holiday in October. That's going to also impact probably Halloween sales, frankly. But nonetheless, those are all things that I think we can anticipate driving that impact. Now, overall retail in the U.S., for example, is forecast to be up 7 to 9% this holiday season. But I'm gonna say that online sales are going to be up north of 30%. Again, lots of variables there that are hard to predict the impact on. But that's 30% on top of the 40 last year. This is tremendous growth, right? We just need to recognize that we hadn't seen numbers like that in online retail growth, for a decade plus, even as more and more people started to adopt digital and come online. Now we're at a position where, we've reached mass adoption and we're growing at 30% year over year in online sales. I'm going to say north of 30%. Maybe it's 32, maybe it's 35, maybe we even get a little bit higher. But we're going to see this ongoing shift to online channels for convenience, for safety, for some consumers, and also, frankly, because the retailers themselves are also going to be pushing it earlier and earlier and earlier. And they can do that online more effectively than they can do that in store. If you think about the assortments that they need to manage in their physical stores as well, they can push holiday online without having to push it in the same way in store out of season. So I think those are all factors that are going to drive that bump.
And one of the end results by shopping online, saving the time, having that convenience, is we can enjoy our holidays more with our families and friends. And isn't that what the whole season's about anyway?
Well, there you go. I agree wholeheartedly.
Thank you. What a cheerful way to end this section. A great way to close it, Pam. I appreciate that.
I feel like we need to play some Christmas music.
Break out the eggnog. Well, we're going to be watching it very closely here at Bloomreach to see how those predictions hold up. Brian coming in strong, giving some numbers too. So we're excited to see what happens in the months coming up. And for those of you watching at home, you'll be able to see how those holiday trends pan out on our next Commerce Pulse Quarterly Roundtable, which will take place in December. There will be a link to that on the event page in case you want to sign up before you leave today, or that information will also be included in the follow-up email sent to all the participants of today's webinar. I want to thank Brian and Pam for their time today, for all of the insights that they've shared. You can hear more from Pam in her coverage for Forbes, as well as in her book, Meet the Henrys, The Millennials That Matter Most for Luxury Brands, available wherever books are sold. And to learn more about the Bloomreach data discussed on today's call, I encourage you to visit our blog at bloomreach.com, where we're tracking the most relevant commerce trends on a monthly basis. So with that, I would like to thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see everyone again next quarter. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.